Right, we'll make a start. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining our webinar on the subject of water stewardship. My name is Paul Thompson. I'm a hydrogeologist by training and a director here at Zenith Global, where I lead our technical team. We've got a long history here of providing expertise to high-value users of groundwater, so notably in the beverage industry, bottled water industry. And we've got an established team of hydrogeologists, water engineers, and sustainability consultants. I'm joined today by Nathan Littlewood, who's our principal consultant. He's been taking a particular interest in the subject of water stewardship and has been looking at it from the beverage industry perspective.
Hello, everybody.
So we're going to talk today about water stewardship and why it's relevant in particular to the food and beverage manufacturers. We'll touch on water strategy and implementation of a stewardship plan. Before we do that, I just want to introduce our 15th Global Bottled Water Congress, which is taking place next month in Evian-les-Bains in France. We're delighted to be co-hosting that with Danone, and we'll be looking in detail at the global market and at industry initiatives. We'll also be holding a workshop on water stewardship on the Wednesday afternoon with speakers from Danone and from the Alliance for Water Stewardship. And the full details of the programme are available on our website. We've got limited time today, so if you do need more detail, do consider attending the Congress or give us a call. Conference speakers, we've got speakers from a range of bottlers, suppliers, NGOs, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, and from Zenith Global. A really strong lineup this year.
Okay, well, let's go. So water security is moving up the corporate and political agendas. Its value is being reassessed. And the beverage industry is at the forefront of this conversation, and I'm pleased to say are taking a leadership role. Now, the water available to us for use is very limited, and the greatest proportion of this being groundwater. And over the years, groundwater specialists have worked on developing sources and managing them. So that's looking at yield, quality, impact, vulnerabilities, catchment management, etc. But these studies can tend to be done in isolation. Now, this water risk matrix is from a large bottler, and it illustrates how, in terms of corporate risk exposure, water scarcity is not necessarily the key issue. And so the skills of water specialists may need to be applied across a wider range of issues. And water stewardship seeks to do this by just broadening the focus. So what is water stewardship? Well, it considers water in terms of value. So that's economic benefit, but also environmental sustainability benefits and social equity. And stewardship goes beyond water management, which often has focused on water scarcity and that impact on business costs. And instead, it also considers business continuity, brand value, social license to operate, and water as a shared resource. So preservation of water quantity and quality has not lost its importance, but stewardship also emphasizes engagement with stakeholders, developing partnerships with NGOs, etc., and also the embracing of technology and innovation. So what does or can a water strategy look like? Well, there's a range of maturity for water strategies, starting with no strategy at all, and then progressing to a strategy that's focused on efficient use, and then a risk-based strategy, and then broadening out further to what can be called a license to grow strategy. So with no strategy, water scarcity is not acknowledged as an issue. And then with an efficiency strategy, there's a recognition of water as a driver of cost, and often targets are set for efficient use of water. Going further than that to a risk strategy, and here stakeholder engagement is weighted much more heavily. And then finally, the license to grow strategy, where in essence, water is quantified in terms of its value, not just its cost. Now, this final one is a water stewardship strategy. Now, the evolution of these strategies represents a transition in thinking from water cost through to water value. So thinking about water and value, now historically, stakeholders were varying regulatory bodies, perhaps a local conservation group, other water users close to the site. But nowadays, everyone is a stakeholder. Communication is rapid, opinions form and can quickly gather momentum. And once formed, it can be a struggle to change perceptions, especially negative ones. It's a lot easier to go from a position of neutrality to a positive perception than struggling out of a negative perception into a neutral and then positive one. Now, all these stakeholders have varying values and different priorities when it comes to water. And it's not unreasonable to think that information transfer and stakeholder involvement will only increase in the future. So the stewardship path. Well, there are many ways that water stewardship can be adopted, but different approaches tend to share common themes. And for water users, much of what you already do is working towards becoming a water steward. For instance, your monitoring regimes, etc. The Alliance for Water Stewardship has a clearly set out path. There are other frameworks, and Zenith Global is an independent consultancy with no real affiliation to AWS other than we are members and we are accredited consultants with them. So the 6 steps of stewardship that they set out do provide quite a clear and concise illustration of what stewardship involves. And it begins with the commitment through to gather and process stage, then planning, implementation of that plan, evaluating, and then finally communication and disclosure. And disclosure, and in the case of AWS, their certification scheme, gives credibility and assurance to stakeholders.
So let's just break out those steps in a bit more detail and look at the practical implementation of water stewardship. On the previous slide, we just saw the 6 steps. The first step being to commit to the process at a leadership level. And then we're going to move on to step 2, which is gathering data. And this is something that will be done to a certain extent to effectively manage costs and to achieve regulatory compliance at all facilities. To some extent, environmental measurement may be undertaken. There may be monitoring of local streams or springs or other sensitive water features. And there needs to be an effort to gather that data together. And then moving forward into implementation, we develop a plan in the 3rd phase, and then move forward into the implementation phase, where really we're fleshing out in a lot more detail hydrogeological research and understanding the catchment for a source, where's the water coming from. It may be necessary to develop a numerical groundwater model to quantify the behavior of the hydrogeological system, and then using that as a tool to measure potential impacts on sensitive water features and the catchment as a whole. Best practice here in terms of water balance, this goes beyond simply pumping up to the maximum available in a license, but instead identifying what water is sustainably available from a catchment and when. It may vary over time, and having a water balance which has been clearly thought through from a sustainability point of view Equally with quality, what impacts can be had on the catchment from overpumping or from discharge of effluent. And then identifying stakeholders within that catchment, so thinking well outside the boundaries of the facility and entering into collective action with those stakeholders. Where water savings are made, there may be reallocation for social or environmental needs, particularly in heavily stressed water areas. And then moving forward into disclosure and communication. It's getting through to that communication stage, that disclosure stage, with a accredited and accreditable and audited message that really sees these benefits to a business.
Okay, well, to summarise then, water stewardship is clearly more than just water management. And I think that can be seen on this figure, where there's a sort of ecosystem around water, which involves academia, NGOs, tech, multinational corporations, investors, governments and regulators, etc. And valuing water is complex. It's more than just cost. The focus certainly has to go beyond just the site boundary. And the benefits of water stewardship are social and environmental, as well as economic. So we've reached the end of this short presentation, but we do have an opportunity for you to submit some questions, if there are any out there. Okay, so we've got a question on time frame. How long does it take to get certification? I'll run with that one. So time is tricky because it really, in essence, depends where you are on that pathway, what you've already been doing compared to what you then need to do to take you forward to becoming a water steward. So in terms of the AWS framework, for example, I believe there's no time limit. It's just a case of preparing your site, and this is a site-specific certification program. And once you feel you're prepared, then arrange it for an external auditor to come in and do their audit. And then once all criteria are met, you either get some feedback to say, here are the things that you need to improve, or the certificate is given. And I should just say that in terms of time and the flexibility and things, there's also an associated issue with cost. And again, costs are just related to, again, where you are on the stewardship pathway, what's left to be done. So we've had a question about just the presentation and it being recorded. So yes, it is being recorded, and eventually it will be posted up on YouTube. You know, contact us for a link. We'll send a link out to people that signed up for this webinar.
Yeah, so question from one of our colleagues in Nigeria who's asking, Zenith is a conformity assessment body as AWS certification. We're accredited consultants, so we can assist with the preparation of a site. We don't do the auditing. So I hope that answers that question. And a question coming in about how we as a business can promote water stewardship and perhaps get the benefit of that disclosure and communication part in the final stage of the process. And obviously that would be ongoing. The idea is that, you know, once the accreditation is achieved, that it lives with the business. I suppose the answer to that is probably best to look at what a lot of the large companies are doing. There's an awful lot of communication going on the subject through social media, through websites. A large number of the big bottlers have subscribed to the water stewardship process, and a brief search around their sites will give you some good indication of the types of communication which can be promoted. Have more questions? I think not at the moment.
Okay, so there is a question here about why is water stewardship particularly relevant to the beverage industry? And I don't know, Paul, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I suppose that the beverage industry is high profile. It's something which is very visible, and it's seen as high value water. So obviously the sales value of a beverage is much higher than the raw material, and so it can be perceived as sensitive. So beverage industry is taking a lead on this. I think it's a proactive lead. It's something that we're seeing very strongly, and there's a great deal of discussion on the subject. It's a natural sector, I think, to be taking water stewardship forward. There are other industries. I mean, chemical industry has been quite active in water stewardship.
Yeah. The extraction industry, mines and things, they're starting to look at this in a bit more detail, and because their reputations sometimes suffer when they don't get it right. Okay, well, I think we'll finish there. Thank you, everybody, for listening. On the final slide there, you can see some contact details if you would like further information. We hope you've found this webinar to be useful, and hope that some of you can explore the topic with us in greater depth at the Bottled Water Congress next month. As I mentioned before, the webinar has been recorded, and so we will make a link on YouTube available.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.